I never thought my world could shatter in just one night. But there I was, standing in my husband's office, staring at a photo that changed everything. A picture of him, wrapped in someone else's arms, smiling the way he used to smile at me. My hands trembled as the realization hit me. Betrayal. Deception. Lies. And the worst part, the woman in the photo wasn't a stranger. She was my sister. Emily and Ryan had been married for over 15 years. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect couple, stable careers, a beautiful home, and 2 teenage kids who kept their lives busy and full. Emily, a school teacher, was warm and nurturing, always putting her family first. Ryan, a successful architect, had a charm that could light up any room. They had built their lives together, brick by brick, and Emily believed nothing could shake their foundation. But cracks had begun to show. Ryan's late nights at work became more frequent. His phone buzzed with messages he quickly hid. Emily brushed it off at first, convincing herself that it was stress or deadlines. After all, every marriage has its ups and downs. She reminded herself of the sweet gestures he still offered, the occasional flowers, the random kisses on her forehead. Then there was her sister, Claire, Emily's confidant and best friend since childhood. Claire had always been the wild one, the free spirit who thrived on attention. Emily often envied her sister's carefree attitude, but never once doubted her loyalty. Claire was the one who had stood beside her as maid of honor, who held her hand through the birth of her first child, and who always made her laugh when life felt too heavy. So, when Ryan started complimenting Claire more often, Emily didn't think much of it. "She's your sister. Stop being paranoid," she'd tell herself. Even when Claire began dropping by unannounced, always when Ryan was home, Emily ignored the nagging feeling in her gut. Until that night, Emily had been searching for receipts in Ryan's office when she found it, a printed photo tucked inside a folder. Ryan and Claire, locked in an embrace that spoke of more than friendship. The world around her blurred. Memories flashed, the stolen glances, the hushed tones, the unexplained absences. She felt sick. Her hands trembled as she sank into his office chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. Questions swirled. How long had this been going on? Had she been blind, or had she simply refused to see the truth? As tears blurred her vision, one thought consumed her. What was she going to do now? The days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and quiet breakdowns. Emily couldn't bring herself to confront Ryan, not yet. Instead, she began to watch him, carefully studying his movements, his words, and the way he acted around her. Every interaction with Claire felt like a dagger to her heart, yet she bit her tongue and pretended not to notice the lingering glances and whispered conversations between them. She told herself she needed proof, something undeniable. The photo could have been a misunderstanding, couldn't it? But deep down she knew the truth. Her instincts screamed at her, and now, every small detail felt like a red flag she couldn't ignore. Ryan's late nights suddenly made sense. The excuses about work emergencies, the showers he took as soon as he came home, and the scent of perfume that wasn't hers, they weren't coincidences. And Claire's sudden interest in helping out around the house, dropping by unannounced, or offering to babysit the kids felt less like sisterly love and more like calculated moves. Emily began to test them. She casually mentioned Claire's name during conversations with Ryan, watching for his reaction. He flinched, just barely, but it was enough. When Claire texted Emily about coming over to talk, Emily waited and timed it perfectly. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw Ryan's car parked outside, hours before he was supposed to be home. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the house, her palms sweaty and her breath shallow. The living room was empty, but she heard hushed voices coming from the kitchen. For a moment she froze, terrified of what she might see. But then anger replaced fear. She walked in, and there they were, Claire leaning against the counter, her hand resting far too comfortably on Ryan's arm. They both jumped back when they saw her, guilt flashing across their faces before they scrambled for excuses. "Oh, Emily, we were just talking about your birthday," Claire said with a nervous laugh, but her eyes betrayed her. "Yeah, I left work early to surprise you," Ryan added, his voice tight, his smile forced. Emily stared at them, her mind racing. She wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but instead she played along. She smiled and pretended to believe them, but inside her resolve hardened. That night, as she lay in bed next to Ryan, pretending to sleep, Emily knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. She needed more than just suspicion. She needed evidence. Real evidence. And she was going to get it. The next morning, Emily woke up early, her mind still replaying the scene from the day before. She couldn't shake the image of Claire's hand on Ryan's arm, or the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. The betrayal burned inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She decided to keep playing the part of the trusting wife, while secretly gathering more evidence. Her plan started with Ryan's phone. He had always been protective of it, but Emily waited until he was in the shower before she took her chance. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. He had never changed his passcode. The messages confirmed her worst fears. Long threads of conversations with Claire, some casual, some filled with flirtation, and then one message that made Emily's stomach drop. "I can't stop thinking about last night. You were incredible." Her breath caught in her throat as she scrolled through more texts. There were photos too. Pictures of Claire in dresses Emily had never seen before, selfies taken in hotel rooms, and one image of Ryan shirtless, lying in bed. Emily's hands trembled as she set the phone down. Her pulse raced, her thoughts spiraling. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, but instead, she forced herself to breathe. She needed to stay in control. Later that day, Claire called her, sounding cheerful and carefree. "Hey, are you free tonight? I thought we could have a girls' night. Drinks and movies, just like old times." Emily hesitated, her anger bubbling beneath the surface, but she forced a smile into her voice. "Sure. That sounds perfect." She wasn't sure what her plan was yet, but she knew she needed to keep Claire close. She needed answers, and maybe a confession. That evening, Claire showed up with a bottle of wine, her smile bright and disarming. They sat in the living room, chatting about work and life, but Emily couldn't stop herself from testing the waters. "So, how's your love life?" Emily asked casually, swirling her glass of wine. Claire laughed nervously. "Oh, you know me. Same old story. No one can keep up with me." Emily's eyes narrowed. "No one? Or someone?" Claire hesitated for just a second, long enough for Emily to catch it. "Come on, Claire. I know you. You can't fool me." For a moment, Claire's mask slipped. Her smile faltered, and her eyes darted away. "It's complicated," Claire finally admitted. Emily's heart pounded. Complicated how? But before Claire could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and Emily caught the name flashing across the screen. Ryan. Claire quickly flipped the phone over, her cheeks flushing. Emily's stomach churned. She had all the confirmation she needed. "You should answer that," Emily said, her voice cold. Claire looked up, her eyes wide with panic. "Emily, I can explain." "Don't." Emily's voice shook, but she stood her ground. "Not now." The tension in the room was suffocating, and Claire grabbed her coat and left without another word. Alone, Emily collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to hate Claire, to hate Ryan, but part of her hated herself more. For trusting them, for letting this happen right under her nose. That night, Ryan came home late again, smelling like cologne and guilt. Emily didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she slipped into bed, pretending to be asleep, while Ryan lay next to her, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Her mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. She replayed every moment in her head, the stolen glances, the hidden messages, and Claire's panicked expression when the truth had come too close to the surface. She had seen enough, but now she needed the final piece. The undeniable evidence that would shatter the lies and expose everything. The next day, Emily called Ryan's office and asked his assistant if he was in. The assistant hesitated before saying, "Oh, he took the afternoon off." "I thought he was with you." Emily's stomach tightened. She hung up the phone and immediately drove to Claire's apartment. She sat in her car outside the building, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Every part of her wanted to leave, to turn back and pretend this wasn't happening. But she couldn't. Minutes turned into hours as she waited, and then she saw them, Ryan and Claire walking out together. Her heart pounded as she watched Ryan lean in and kiss Claire on the lips before they got into her car and drove off. Tears blurred Emily's vision, but her fury outweighed her pain. She followed them, keeping her distance until they pulled into a small, secluded motel on the edge of town. Watching them disappear inside, Emily felt like her world had completely unraveled. She parked and sat there for a long moment, debating whether to storm in and confront them. But instead, she reached for her phone. Her hands trembled as she took a picture of their car in the parking lot and sent it to Ryan with a simple text. "I know." Minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was Ryan. She let it ring and then declined the call. Moments later, a flurry of texts followed. "Emily, please, it's not what you think." I can explain. Don't do this. We can fix this. But Emily didn't respond. She got out of the car, walked up to the motel room door and knocked. When Claire opened it, wearing nothing but a robe, her eyes widened in shock. Emily? Claire's voice cracked. Ryan appeared behind her, shirtless and pale. Emily, wait. No, Emily cut him off. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. You don't get to explain this away. Claire stepped back, guilt written all over her face, but Emily's eyes stayed locked on Ryan. I trusted you, she said, her voice breaking. I trusted both of you. Ryan tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. Don't touch me, she snapped. Claire started crying. Emily, I never wanted this to happen. You never wanted this? Emily's voice rose. You didn't want to sleep with my husband? You didn't want to destroy my family? Claire sobbed, but Emily wasn't finished. She turned back to Ryan. And you're pathetic. I stood by you through everything. I believed in you. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me. Ryan's shoulders sagged, and for once he didn't have an excuse. Emily's voice dropped. I'll never forgive you. Either of you. And with that she turned and walked away. The drive home was a blur. By the time she stepped into the empty house, the weight of everything hit her. She sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The betrayal felt unbearable, but somewhere deep inside, she also felt relief. Relief that the lies were out in the open, that she no longer had to pretend everything was fine. That night, Ryan came home, begging for forgiveness. He tried to explain it away, saying it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. But Emily refused to listen. She told him to pack his bags and leave. As for Claire, Emily blocked her number and cut her out completely. The pain of losing her sister hurt almost as much as losing her husband, but she knew she couldn't let toxic people remain in her life. In the days that followed, Emily struggled to rebuild herself. She cried. She screamed. She doubted whether she had done the right thing. But each day she grew stronger. And one morning, as she stood in front of the mirror, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: strength. She wasn't broken. She wasn't destroyed. She had survived. The days after Ryan left were the hardest. Emily wandered through the empty house, every room echoing with memories she couldn't erase. The dining table where they had shared meals as a family, the couch where Ryan once held her during movie nights, and the bedroom where they had whispered dreams of growing old together. All of it felt like ghosts lingering in the corners of her life. Her children noticed the tension right away. Emily tried to shield them, brushing off their questions with excuses about Ryan needing time away for work. But the cracks were too big to hide. One evening, her daughter, Lily, found her crying in the kitchen. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emily hesitated, but then she realized she couldn't lie anymore, not to her daughter, not to herself. "Your dad and we're going through something right now," Emily said softly. "But I need you to know it's not your fault. And no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Lily's eyes filled with tears as she hugged Emily tightly. It was in that moment Emily realized how much her children needed her to be strong, even when she felt anything but. Ryan called every day, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologies to desperate pleas to fix things. He sent flowers, wrote letters, and even showed up at the house once, only to be turned away. Each gesture chipped away at Emily's resolve, but she reminded herself of the betrayal she had witnessed. The lies, the texts, the motel. No amount of apologies could erase that. Claire, too, tried to reach out. She left long, rambling voicemails, crying and begging Emily to forgive her. But Emily didn't listen. Claire wasn't just her sister. She had been her best friend, someone she had trusted more than anyone. And yet, Claire had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The loneliness crept in at night, wrapping around Emily like a suffocating blanket. She missed the warmth of Ryan's body beside her, even as she hated herself for feeling that way. She questioned everything. Had she not been enough? Had she pushed him away? Could she have stopped this if she had just tried harder? But as the weeks passed, something shifted. Emily began to reclaim her life. She threw herself into her work, spending extra time at school helping students with projects. She took yoga classes, went out for coffee with coworkers, and started journaling. And then there were the small victories. The first time she laughed at a joke without forcing it. The first time she looked in the mirror and didn't see someone broken. The first time she slept through the night without waking up in tears. Ryan still tried to win her back, but Emily no longer felt the pull. She saw him for who he really was, a man who didn't value what they had built, who had chosen selfishness over loyalty. Claire, on the other hand, was harder to let go. Emily had loved her sister fiercely, and despite everything, there was still a part of her that wanted to pick up the phone and hear Claire's voice. But trust, once broken, couldn't be pieced back together. One afternoon, Emily stood outside Claire's apartment, debating whether to knock. She wanted answers. She wanted closure. But in the end, she turned around and walked away. Some doors were better left closed. The fallout wasn't just about losing Ryan and Claire. It was about losing the person Emily had once been. The woman who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was time to stop living in illusions and start building something real. As she sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset with a glass of wine, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had been broken, yes, but she wasn't destroyed. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. Months passed, and Emily slowly began to rebuild her life. The wounds Ryan and Claire had left were still there, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they became reminders of her strength, her resilience, and her ability to survive even the deepest betrayals. She focused on herself in ways she never had before. Emily redecorated the house, replacing old furniture and repainting the walls. She needed to reclaim her space, to make it hers again. She even took down the family photos that had once lined the hallways. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about letting go of what no longer served her. Her kids became her anchor. She threw herself into being the best mother she could be, making sure they felt loved and secure despite the upheaval. And in the process, she learned to lean on them, too. Lily often left little notes of encouragement on her desk, and her son, Jake, made it his mission to make her laugh whenever he saw her looking too serious. But the biggest transformation happened within Emily herself. She started journaling every night, pouring out her emotions onto paper until the words no longer felt like weights pressing down on her chest. She also began therapy, where she learned to unpack the layers of guilt, anger, and heartbreak that had threatened to consume her. One day, during a session, her therapist asked her, "What do you want moving forward?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, Emily had been focused on surviving that she hadn't thought about what came next. "I want peace," she finally said. "And I want to trust myself again." And that became her focus. Not finding someone new or filling the void Ryan had left, but learning to love herself again. She realized how much of herself she had given away over the years, first to Ryan, then to their family, and it was time to take some of that back. When Ryan reached out one final time, asking if they could meet to talk, Emily agreed. Not because she wanted to reconcile, but because she needed closure. They met at a quiet cafe, and for the first time Emily saw him clearly. He wasn't the man she had built up in her head all those years. He was flawed, insecure, and selfish. And while she still felt the sting of betrayal, she no longer felt tied to him. "I forgive you," she said softly, surprising even herself. Ryan looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "Emily, No," she cut him off. "This isn't for you. It's for me." And with that, she walked away, leaving him and the pain behind. As she drove home, Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing what he had done. It meant releasing herself from the chains of anger and bitterness. That night, as she sat in her backyard, sipping tea and watching the stars, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Her journey wasn't over. She still had scars, and there were moments when the memories resurfaced. But now those moments didn't break her. They reminded her of how far she had come. And if there was one thing Emily had learned, it was this: betrayal might break your heart, but it doesn't have to break you. What would you do if someone you loved betrayed you like this? Could you ever forgive them, or would you walk away and never look back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on Emily's story. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more shocking and emotional stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.